So Matt, we can dive right into questions.
Yeah, okay, so I think we all saw the readout of the Secretary's meeting with Minister Dermer yesterday, which didn't really say a whole lot. So I'm just wondering if you can expand on whether you guys think that, or whether you have made an assessment that Israel is meeting the criteria that was set out in the letter.
Sure. So I'm sorry that you found it unsatisfactory, but
No, I didn't say it was unsatisfactory. I just said it didn't say a whole lot.
let me make a couple of points. So over the past 30 days, Israel has taken a number of steps to address the measures laid out in the letter that Secretaries Blinken and Austin sent earlier in October. We continue to be in discussion with our partners in Israel about these steps that they've taken, which they took as a result of U.S. intervention, as well as additional steps that we feel that still need to be taken. Ultimately, Matt, the U.S. It continues to be the largest provider of humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, and we're going to continue to do everything we can to surge humanitarian assistance to people in Gaza. And ultimately, our view continues to be that the only long-term solution to alleviating the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza is bringing this war to an end, and we're going to continue to work to achieve that. The Secretary raised all this with Minister Dermer yesterday.
Okay, but I don't believe I heard an answer to my question in there.
Look, Matt.
Are they have they met? You guys yourself set this 30-day deadline. Today is the deadline. Did they meet? Did they meet it, or did they not?
So I think first, when it comes to assessing the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the region writ large, I think it's important to remember that we have constant evaluations ongoing and constant assessments ongoing about the circumstances. And first, let me just say, specifically, before I answer your question, that we've seen some steps being taken over the past 30 days. Specifically, we have seen the reopening of the Erez crossing. We have seen a new crossing at Kisufim open. As it relates to the Jordanian Armed Forces corridor, we have seen a waivement of certain customs requirement that humanitarian organizations had previously said was an obstacle. We've also seen some additional delivery routes open within Gaza, including Bani Suhelia Road, expanding the use of the Israeli fence road, as well as repairing the coastal road. We've also seen some deliveries resume and restored in the north, first to Gaza City, and in this most recent week to areas surrounding Jabalia. We've also seen the expansion of the Musavi humanitarian zone, and we have seen the institution of periodic operational pauses. This is all to say, Matt, we at this time have not made an assessment that that the Israelis are in violation of U.S. law. But most importantly, we are going to continue to watch how these steps that they've taken, how they are being implemented, how that they can be continued to be expanded on. And through that, we're going to continue to assess their compliance with U.S. law. We've seen some progress being made. We would like to see some more changes happen. We believe that had it not been for U.S. intervention, these changes may not have ever taken place. But most importantly, we want to see continued progress, and that's what we're looking for.
All right. So essentially, there isn't going to be any consequence for Israel not meeting the.
I certainly don't have a change in U.S. policy to announce today, Matt, but as you just heard me say, we are constantly going to assess the circumstances on the ground. We are looking for some of these steps that we've made. We want to make sure that they are sustained and expanded upon, and certainly if we don't see that, if we don't continue to see steps in the appropriate direction, we certainly will enforce U.S. law.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
But you guys were the ones that gave them the 30-day deadline. It's hard to see your answers today, such as they are, as anything other than kind of giving them a pass for not meeting the criteria that were laid out in the letter.
I would not view it as giving them a pass because one, no one is up here, certainly I'm not, saying that the situation in Gaza or the humanitarian circumstances are rosy. It is a very dire circumstance, and what we need to see is these steps acted on. We need to see them implemented. And the ultimate hope is that through these steps, some conditions have been created in which we can see things like additional aid, additional food trucks, additional measures being taken that ultimately will be beneficial to the Palestinian people in Gaza. That's what we aim to see. And as you've heard me say, and as you've heard Matt and the Secretary say previously, if we don't see steps being taken, we of course will appropriately enforce U.S. law. But
Correct
today,
me if I'm wrong, isn't that what you guys said a month ago?
that is what we said a month
Okay.
ago, and that is why
they
we
have
laid
not-
out.
And they have not yet met them, because you say that they have taken some steps, but more needs to be made. In other words, they have not
That
met the
letter,
criteria by the
Matt,
deadline, and you are giving them a pass. Is that, I don't understand, there's no other way to look at it.
no, I don't think that is true. That letter was specific about some specific areas where we wanted to
Yes,
see them
and
take
have
some
you
additional
seen- Have you
steps.
seen those steps that you
We
laid
have
out in
seen
the
some
letter?
of those steps being
Some,
taken. Yes,
some.
yes.
But it didn't say some, it said all, right?
Matt, the point is, more than any singular step, we outlined a number of steps that we wanted to see taken. What matters most is not just a specific action or a specific item, but the totality of the progress that we
I don't understand why you
see.
sent the letter in the first place, but I'll let others have a crack at it.
The point is, Matt, that we want to see the totality of the humanitarian situation improve, and we think some of these steps will allow the conditions for that to continue to progress.
But I think you're going to get this question a lot. I think we're trying to understand why the administration secretary, Matt, I think it was November the 4th, he said from this podium, we are going to look at the results. And the results so far, that was the little assessment by him that day, are not good enough. And then here you are, about a week later, you're effectively giving Israel a pass on this.
We are not
Please
giving.
help us
We're not
understand.
giving Israel a pass. First of all, the efforts and the things that we had seen in place a week ago certainly were not satisfactory. But I am standing here before you with new and additional information. It is up to you to intake it or process it however you like. But when we were talking about this last week, just again, the new crossing at Kisufim, that had not been opened. Erez had not been reopened. This waiving of a customs requirement in the Jordanian corridor had not been in place. These additional routes within Gaza had not been in place. So these are the kinds of results and steps that we were talking about a week ago. These are the kinds of things we were talking about when we outlined that letter. There is nobody in this administration saying that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is pristine. It is a humanitarian. It continues to be a crisis, and it continues to be dire circumstances. And the point is, we want to see changes like these being made consistently and over an extended period of time. Our hope is that things like these have created the operational throughput. They have created the capacity. They have reduced some barriers that will make it so that the aid can get to the places where it needs to go. And if we do not continue to see steps like this in the right direction, then certainly we would find the government out of compliance with U.S. law.
And
But Humaira, the important thing, and I'm not trying to harp on this, is that there are new things that have been done. You can choose to disagree with whether it's enough or not, and humanitarian groups can choose to disagree whether it's enough. And we certainly are not saying that it is a silver bullet, but there are new progress markers that have been made in terms of trying to be responsive to what is happening in the humanitarian context.
We have seen those steps, but what we're trying to tell you is that the U.S. government has explicitly said the steps themselves is not going to be enough. We need to see the results on the ground. So you keep telling me they have taken steps, and whether or not I find them satisfactory, I think that's quite irrelevant. The relevance is that what is the situation on the ground? And you're describing it as dire. That's why we're trying to. But I don't want to stand.
We couldn't agree more, Humaira. We couldn't agree that the situation is dire.
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
You keep talking about ongoing assessment. When do you intend to do this? This administration has less than 70 days in office. And the humanitarian aid situation is a it's been going on over a year. It's it's clear that you had trouble convincing Israel to boost measures to improve humanitarian aid. What makes you think that you're going to achieve that in the remaining time, if at all?
So first, let me just say, assessing the humanitarian situation and assessing steps and ways that we can continue to support that line of effort is not something that starts or stops. So to your question about timing, we were looking at the humanitarian situation in Gaza before October 7th, in the time since, and will continue to be engaged on this. When it comes to the letter, we were looking at the humanitarian situation in Gaza before this letter was sent, and we will continue to look closely at the humanitarian situation in Gaza after this 30-day period is up. We are constantly assessing and evaluating, and if we do not see consistent progress, if we do not see the results on the ground, then we will, of course, make appropriate assessments about their compliance with international law and compliance with U.S. law, and that'll continue to be the case.
Just a few more things.
Yeah.
What was Legal Bureau's input in this?
I'm just not going to get into the deliberative process or speak to specifics. What I can say and what we have said before as it relates to this, these are deliberative processes that include input from not just across the State Department, but across the interagency, as well as those individuals who are on the front lines of working on these very serious humanitarian issues.
Right, but given this is an assessment or on whether or not a country is violating U.S. law, could we assume that State Department's Legal Bureau concluded that Israel is not violating U.S. law?
I'm not here to offer an assessment or even a legal assessment on how a particular bureau made or didn't make a recommendation. What I am here to say, and what we've said again, is that we've seen some steps taken. I outlined them in detail to you, to Jenny, to Matt. What we want to see now is that we want to see these steps sustained over time, and we're going to continue to remain in close touch with our Israeli partners, the United Nations, other partners in the region, to make sure that these steps have a lasting impact on the results on the ground. And if that doesn't end up being the case, the United States will also take appropriate action.
Final one. U.S. Ambassador to UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield last month said U.S. was watching to ensure that Israel's actions on the ground needs to show that it doesn't have a policy of starvation, given that you have had an assessment going on all of the humanitarian aid measures. Can you say that's the case, that they don't have a policy of starvation?
I don't have a specific assessment to offer, Humaira. What I can say is that there has not been a conclusive finding of that, or at least I don't have one to offer from this government. What we are hoping is that these steps and them contributed with the additional steps that we would like to see happen can, again, as I said to Jenny, create the space, these operational changes create the space and the capacity to increase the number of trucks, the types of aid, and to make sure that the product can get where it needs to go. And it is absolutely incumbent upon the government of Israel and the United Nations and other partners to ensure that it actually does that. And we are going to take our responsibility in this incredibly seriously, and we'll be making sure to work hard with all the relevant interlocutors to see that happen. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Assuming this is on topic.
Yeah,
Oh,
same
go
topic.
ahead.
I think backing up a little bit, explain the logic of setting a 30-day deadline if the end result was going to be that we're hoping to have these continuous assessments, continuous improvements, even though all of those demands haven't been met. Why set the 30-day deadline? Because when this letter did surface, there was a lot of speculation that perhaps this was a way to kind of kick the ball back beyond the election.
So look, we make foreign policy and national security decisions because they are in the interest of the United States, in the interest of the American people, in the interest of the region, not for any electoral political reason. This letter was sent because the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense had legitimate and serious concern about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. This department and the Pentagon had some specific concerns about the lack of progress in some specific areas, and it had some recommendations on what steps we think, specifically the IDF, COGAT, the government of Israel writ large, could take to further enhance the humanitarian situation in Gaza. it's been 30 days. We have seen some of those steps being taken. Again, I outlined those already. There are a number of steps that we think also additionally could be taken, and will continue to remain engaged on those issues. But again, 30 days ago, much of the things that I outlined to Sean, to Jenny, to Humaira, those things had not happened yet. And so those are important steps in the right direction. We need to see more, we want to see more, and we're going to continue to be engaged on making sure that more happens, and ultimately, though, that these steps have a tangible result. That's what this is about.
Talking about the operational changes, so far in the month of November, only 624 trucks have entered into Gaza, according to COGAT, and the letter calls for 350 a day. So are these operational changes that you've seen, can you reasonably assess that going forward, in 2 days, the amount of trucks that have been able to enter in almost 2 weeks will be achievable?
I'm not going to speculate on a specific metric, Shannon, but that is our absolute hope. Our hope is that these kinds of changes will make it possible for these kind of increased metrics to be seen. And now it is inherently incumbent on the government of Israel, on the United Nations, on other partners to put that into action. And we certainly are ready to stand at the ready to be continued to engaged on this to get that across the finish line also.
That it certainly was not satisfactory a week ago. Should the interpretation be that the things in the ensuing week that's now satisfactory? I know you said it's dire, that it's not pristine, but are these satisfactory measures essentially?
These are steps that we think that are responsive in part to the letter that the secretary sent. It addresses some of the specific concerns that that letter raised. Again, I'll use the Jordan corridor as an example. That letter from Secretary Blinken and Austin expressed some areas of improvement that can be made on the Jordan corridor. One of the steps that I shared with you today was an example of such a metric. There's also been additional border crossings open and additional routes opening. So there have been new things that we're seeing. The overall humanitarian situation in Gaza continues to remain unsatisfactory, but in the context of the letter, it's not about whether we find something satisfactory or not. It's that what are the actions that we're seeing? These actions that we have seen, we think that these are steps in the right direction. We want to see more steps. We want to see these steps sustained over a significant period of time, and ultimately, we want to see these steps have a result on the situation on the ground, and that's what we're going to continue to be engaged on.
Sure. A number of people have asked you about the 30-day deadline, how that obviously came after the election, and how the administration doesn't have much time left. I mean, is there a sense that perhaps this is a sign that the leverage is gone, that this current administration has? It's not so long before.
Again, Sean, the 30-day time period was not about any particular day on a calendar, and it certainly wasn't about electoral politics. It's that things take time. It's that processes, especially in such a volatile region, sometimes take time to unearth and to move forward. And so today we have seen some progress in that space. We've seen some additional crossings. We've seen some additional routes within Gaza. We've seen the adjustments made to the Jordan corridor. We intend to continue to work at this and see more.
And just a second. I mean, but in terms of, even if it was not part of the electoral calendar, I mean, it's, but we're saying, but in terms of if the U.S. isn't taking action at this point, and the clock is ticking anyway, what makes you think that there would be any leverage that the U.S. has toward the end of this?
Well, Sean, I'll just say that we all know what the election result was. I don't need to point that out to anybody. But here we are, about a week and a half after that, with some new progress points that we can point to, with some actions that the Israeli government has taken that we think would not have happened had it been for U.S. intervention. So we continue to think that our role, our engagement, our diplomacy has a space. It has a role to play. It has a serious role to play. That is at the core of what this secretary and this president believe. And we're certainly going to continue to engage and work really hard at this. Ultimately, it's at the end of the day not up to us, but we think that it was U.S. engagement that led to these progress points being met, and we're going to continue to work at it.
Can I just do one slightly, some people might ask more specifically on this. Can I just see one additional aspect on the conflict? Qatar. I'm sure you saw over the weekend the statements coming out about Qatar stepping back a little bit from mediation. Is this a disappointment? Does this show that there perhaps are not as many hopes right now for brokering something?
So first, Sean, let me say a couple things. We have, going back as far as we all can remember, have been explicitly clear with countries around the world that certainly it can no longer be business as usual with Hamas. As it relates to decisions and things that are being discussed between our Qatari partners and Hamas, I will defer to Qatar to speak to that, and I'm not going to get into those private conversations. We're continuing to pursue a number of initiatives to secure the release of hostages. That work is ongoing. We have not given up hope, and it's critical to us to get a deal done as soon as possible, especially so that we can bring the remaining hostages home to their families. They have now been held in captivity for over 100 days in what can only be unimaginable conditions, and so ending the terrible suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza also is tantamount, and we're going to continue to work at this. Our view is that if Hamas wants a ceasefire, which they claim they do, they need to engage, and right now they're not.
Just a final one for me. I mean, is your interpretation that is it your view that the mediation by Qatar is basically done for the moment? I mean, is it do you actually see things that are ongoing, or is it?
So let's not forget, Sean, that going back to, I want to say, even before the summertime, Qatar, the United States, Egypt have played immeasurable mediating roles. That I have no doubt will continue the role that they are going to play. I'm not going to speculate on what the potential location of Hamas may or may not mean. Again, that is not something I'm going to speak to. I will let others, I will let the Qatari government speak to their own decision making and their own engagements.
Going back to the letter, last week when I asked Matt whether it included a figure, a number of trucks and so on. So do you believe that these trucks were met, the number of the trucks that were stipulated in the letter were met?
So I answered this question already, Said.
Well,
I literally answered that question.
Okay, so you feel that it
5
was
minutes
met,
ago.
right? It was met?
That is not what I said. What I said was that our hope is that the steps that we have seen taken will create the operational conditions to allow such a figure to be able to enter.
Right.
It is incumbent on the government of Israel and the United Nations and others to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get there. And the United States is going to continue to play a role when it comes to that. It is not about one singular step or one singular metric specifically, Saeed. This is about all of these actions coming together and what that means for the humanitarian situation on the ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, the letter really says either or. I mean, it was very stark, very clear in its approach and so on. So would you say that this element of it, either or, is no longer operative? It's null? There would be no action taken if Israel backs down on the aid and so on?
That is the opposite of what I just said, Saeed, in that this is an area that we are going to continue to pay close attention to.
Right.
And if we do not see consistent progress in this space, if we do not see progress that we find to be satisfactory, we of course are going to continue to, and we will enforce U.S. law, and we will make sure that we're doing so appropriately. This is not at all an announcement that the United States finds the humanitarian situation in Gaza satisfactory, or that it's great or significantly improved. That is not the case. That's not the reality of the ground. The letter that the two secretaries sent was specifically about areas that we had some specific concern, some suggested steps which we outlined that we thought would help address the humanitarian situation. We have seen some of those steps being taken. Some of those steps have not been taken yet, but this is not about a singular step or not. What this is about is that the totality of actions, including actions that were not included in the letter. And ultimately, our goal is we want to see all of that, whether it was in the letter or not, whether it was something that the United States suggested or not. We want all of those things to contribute to an increased and a positive humanitarian situation. That continues to not be the case.
Okay, so let me ask you something. This aspect of the letter that says, if you don't do this, we will do this and so on, is it still operative, or has it been canceled, or has it been expired, not canceled?
Said, we will always be effective implementers of
Right.
U.S. law.
Okay.
Currently, we have not made an assessment that they are in violation of U.S. law. That, of course, can change at any time. We are watching these circumstances closely, and we will make appropriate changes within our own policy should we need to if we assess that their compliance with U.S. law has changed. It's as simple as that.
I wonder if we can get you to comment on what Mr. Smotrich said, the Minister of Finance, about, once the new president is sworn in, they'll be able to annex the West Bank. Do you have any comment on that?
This president, President Biden and Secretary Blinken, have reiterated consistently the clear position of the United States in support of a two-state solution as part of a negotiated process that ultimately will provide an independent Palestinian state with appropriate security guarantees for Israel. The comments that were made by this minister certainly are not conducive to building an enduring peace, and they are incredibly inconsistent with the principles that Secretary Blinken laid out in Tokyo last year.
Well, the Cannes news agency, an Israeli news agency, also quoted the Prime Minister himself as saying exactly that in a closed-door meeting. So is it something that you raise with the Prime Minister, or something that the President likely to raise, as one of his last actions and so on, to impress upon this Prime Minister that that the settlements are illegal, that settlements ought to stop, that the West Bank should remain a viable land for a Palestinian state?
Saeed, at the corner of our approach to policy when it comes to this region, specifically policy that we think impacts the Israeli people and the Palestinian people, at the center of that is a constant and clear position of the United States commitment to a two-state solution. I will let other people speak to their own points of